3 years later, I get this call. Do I want to run the platform committee for Geraldine Ferraro? I had run the platform for Kennedy at the 1980 convention, and I had 23 minority reports. And
Geraldine Ferraro becomes the first woman ever nominated to become vice president.
That was my challenge
Walter
for the
Mondale.
next 6 months. So there was a group of us. So I take this job, and I take this job in part because I care about the party platform and it's a fun thing to do, but mostly I take this job because there's a group of women, the jokingly called the A team. There was no B or C team. Might as well take A. The A team, who had decided they wanted to put a woman on the ticket. And one of the prime...
And since Walter Mondale didn't have a big chance of winning that, why not?
Well, that was what we did.
Why not?
And it was pretty exciting. So I remember calling Geraldine, Jerry, and saying, go get your hair done. She said, what? I said, just don't even talk to me. Just go to the hairdressers. And when they call here, I'll tell them you're there, but they're gonna call. And I knew before she did, so I just sent her to the hairdressers.
That was exciting.
It was incredibly exciting.
It doesn't seem as unusual today, but
no,
at the time
it was remarkable.
Remarkable.
It was just, everybody remembered where they were. And we just cried watching it. I mean, I had been working on it for months, and I knew it was coming, and I knew the zigzags along the road, but still there was this amazing sense of possibility that I don't know that we've had since. I mean, maybe, and it wasn't complicated in the way that everything around Hillary became complicated. There was just an outpouring. I mean, later Jerry got into some troubles with, having to get her husband's taxes, etc. But at the initial moment, it was just a moment of pure joy.
How important was that last debate when Reagan looked into the camera and said,
I'm not going to make an issue of my opponent's age. It was the end of that. Youth or inexperience. Youth or inexperience. It was the end of that campaign. You always know when a campaign's over. I mean, Poly Pavilion in 1988, when Bernie Shaw looked at Mike Dukakis and said, if someone were to rape and kill your wife.
Kitty Dukakis.
Yeah, that one was over that night,
right
after that question. There's often moments, not always, but often moments in campaigns that come to symbolize what's good, what's bad, transparent moments.
So after Ronald Reagan sent Walter Mondale back to the private sector, you had been part of 2
presidential campaigns
that failed.
And I was specializing in losing campaigns at that point, so I thought, why not do another one? Well, the 80s were a very strange time for the Democratic Party because the party was out of sync with the demographics of the country. If Michael Dukakis had run for president against Donald Trump, he would have won. Okay? Michael Dukakis had run for president in the 21st century. He would have won. On the other hand, if Barack Obama had been stuck with the electorate we had, which was still tilted right of center, still huge problems for Democrats with white male voters. Democrats still have problems with white male voters, but there are fewer of them proportionately than there used to be. And Democrats used to do terribly among white male voters and get killed for it.
And Ronald Reagan was a phenomenon.
Ronald Reagan was a great candidate.
A phenomenon, yeah.
But George Herbert Walker Bush wasn't the world's greatest candidate, but he had demographics going for him.
So he had Ronald Reagan going for him,
and he had
too.
Ronald Reagan's
third term going for him.
You got it.
So now, how do you get involved with Mike Dukakis involved in the presidential campaign?
Well, I got involved initially because my friends were putting it together. Okay. And so I was back teaching at Harvard, and I was a full-time volunteer, you might say. I had taken a leave from Harvard to do some practice, and I was on my way back, and I was a full-time volunteer at the campaign for, 6 months. And then Labor Day weekend of 1987, I was moving into my Harvard house where I was going to live and teach at Harvard and work, volunteer at the campaign. And that weekend, the two senior guys in the campaign made a videotape. And the videotape showed Joe Biden giving a speech and the Labor candidate for Prime Minister in England, Neil Kinnock, giving exactly the same speech. What today would pass as, you know, something a kindergarten kid could do, which is to put, not exactly flattering to be giving the same speech as Neil Kinnock, not flattering to Biden, maybe flattering to Kinnock, but not enough to get somebody fired from a campaign.
Right.
And they made this video and they gave one copy to the reporter for the Des Moines Register and they gave one copy to Maureen Dowd from the New York Times. And the following Saturday, I guess it was a slow news Saturday, and Maureen Dowd put it on the front page of the New York Times. And it was the beginning of the end of the Biden campaign. Senator Biden, then Senator Biden, was about to begin the judiciary hearings on the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court. He attacked it as a terrible, dirty trick, you know, the old political strategy of the best defense is a good offense. They went on the offense. And Michael Dukakis stood up and said, well, if anybody from my campaign had anything to do with this, they're going to be fired. I didn't pay any attention. I was at Bed Bath & Beyond, just like every other college student, stocking up on, you know, towels and sheets for my new dorm apartment. As it turned out, the campaign manager and deputy campaign manager of the Dukakis campaign were the ones who had done it. When I heard the news, I went racing up to the State House to try to convince Michael not to fire them. I failed. So there we were in September. Our campaign did not have a campaign manager or a deputy campaign manager. I went home for the weekend to California where I was living my complicated life. And Michael called me and said, you know, will you take over the campaign? And at that point it was a question of, is this campaign going to survive? I mean, we had just lost our top two people. It was September. We hadn't shown anything. You're the governor of Massachusetts. You lose your top people in this kind
small
of
state
messy scandal. Are you going to survive? And we went ahead. We didn't just survive. We managed to win the nomination by some small miracle. And then we had a very tough general election campaign.
How did you win the not did you, but how did that
He was a really good primary candidate, and we won the nomination because we understood the rules. He was a very good primary candidate, and we knew how to play this game.
Not a good general election
No, but a really good primary candidate, because the primaries on the Democratic side then as now were liberal. And he was a liberal. And he was a liberal who'd accomplished something. He was a competent liberal, but he was very much a liberal. And he was very good in small audiences and very disciplined, and he could give the same speech 5,000 times without making a mistake, which is what you need to be a good primary candidate. I mean, Ronald Reagan hated the primaries. You know, because he was not really made to be a primary candidate. He was made to be a big general election candidate with big commercials and big audiences and big events. Dukakis was a great primary candidate, but there were a couple problems, huge problems he faced in the general election. One was he went into it largely unknown and people thought he was a moderate. He used to beat the black candidate, Jesse Jackson, every Tuesday by the end. So people thought he was a moderate. And there's a great joke, Michael, there's only two things that come from Massachusetts, liberals and lobsters. And by October, people are going to realize he's not a lobster, right? So we had the liberal issue, and he didn't want to go negative. He had an absolute aversion to going negative, to going on the attack.
And the campaign manager for George Herbert Walker Bush did not have a tendency of, he did not have a problem going negative.
No. He was going to make George, Willie Horton, the black convicted murderer who got out on a furlough. We all knew about this. It was a Boston story with a revolving door. Right.
Revolving.
That was the good ad. That was the ad that Roger made. And there's a funny story about that ad, I'll tell you. There were 2 Willie Horton ads. The first one was a horribly racist ad made by Jesse Helms' people using this horrible picture of Willie Horton and a block going back and forth, and it was basically turning Dukakis' face into Willie Horton's face. Awful. Roger Ailes, my former client, longtime friend, made the revolving door ad. Mm-hmm. And I sat down, I said, show me the ad. And I watched the ad, and I said, play it again. They play it again. I shook my head. Somebody said, what's the matter? I said, there aren't that many white people in hardly any prison in America. Where did they go to shoot this? Idaho or Utah? Because they had gone out of their way, it was obvious, not to have minorities going through the turnstile. Last year, I was talking to Roger about the ad, and I said to him, where'd you get all those white people? He laughed. He said when they sent him the initial outtakes for the ad, they had too many black people going in the turnstile. So he said, you got any extra prison uniforms? They said, sure. He put the entire crew in prison uniforms, and that's who was going around the turnstile, was the crew who was filming the ad. Anyway, Roger was sort of a genius, but
sort of.
He was a genius.
Yes. So
Michael didn't want to inoculate himself against any of that. I mean,
and then that question about the death penalty.
Yeah. Well, he was prepared for a different answer. The truth was, his own family had been victimized by crime, and we talked about it endlessly. And he,
in the end, was just not as good a general election candidate.
He wasn't, but his integrity got in the way, his sense of responsibility got in the way, a lot of good characteristics and values got in the way. He didn't want to take cheap shots at Bush. He didn't want to run the populist number and accuse Bush of being a rich guy. And the funny part was, one of the people who was very involved in that campaign was the then governor of Arkansas, who would stand by and watch these things and just shake his head. I mean, when Dukakis said to me, I wouldn't be comfortable taking unlimited contributions in our victory fund, our soft money fund. Clinton looked at me and said, why not? Right? What's to be uncomfortable about?
And that's how you first meet Bill Clinton.
I had met Bill Clinton back in the early 80s because everybody knew Bill Clinton. He was the boy wonder of American politics. He had run Texas for McGovern in '72. And gotten himself elected governor of Arkansas in 1978 at the age of about, 32 or something like that. Yeah. So I first came across Bill Clinton back in '79, '80 because all the guys I worked for in the Kennedy campaign had worked with him in the McGovern campaign. But I got to know him well in 1988 when he really stood by me and stood by the campaign in the general election. I mean, it was a tough general election, and people were attacking us all the time. Like, why don't you run a negative ad? Oh, that's a good idea. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, I mean, people always assume, oh, you must not have thought of running negative ads, right? Why don't you take on Willie Horton? Wow, that's a good idea. Yeah. Anyway, Clinton was on the inside. He knew what was going on. He tried his best to help us in every way he could, and I think went to school on the campaign a little bit, and he and I got to be good friends.
And what were your impressions of him?
Oh, he was brilliant. Pound for pound, he was the most brilliant politician I'd ever met. He used to be my first call and last call every night.